It was a crisp autumn day, the kind where the sun gently warmed the skin, and the golden leaves drifted lazily through the air. The small chapel where Ethan and I exchanged our vows was bathed in light, with friends and family gathered in joyful celebration. I had dreamed of this day for years, and now, standing there in my white lace gown, with Ethan gazing at me with love in his eyes, it felt like the beginning of something perfect. Everything about our wedding was beautiful, from the soft melodies played by the string quartet to the delicate flowers that lined the aisle. As I walked down the aisle toward Ethan, I felt as though I was floating. His smile, bright, genuine, full of warmth, was everything I had ever needed. Ethan had always been my rock, the man who could make me laugh, feel safe, and believe in love again after all the uncertainties in my life. I knew, without a doubt, that he was my forever. But as I stood at the altar, something caught my eye. Off to the side, seated in the front row, was Olivia, Ethan's older sister. She sat still and poised, dressed in an elegant gown, her face framed by perfectly styled hair. Yet, her expression didn't match the joy surrounding us. Instead, Olivia wore a tight, unreadable smile, her eyes betraying no real emotion. There was something unsettling in the way she watched us, her gaze more calculating than celebratory. I brushed off the feeling of unease, reminding myself that Olivia had always been a bit distant. She and Ethan had a complicated history, shaped by the loss of their parents when they were young. Olivia, being the older sibling, had taken on a motherly role for Ethan, practically raising him. It wasn't surprising that she might feel protective, perhaps even a little overbearing. Ethan always spoke highly of her, describing her as his guardian, the person who had sacrificed everything for him. In many ways, I admired her too. She had been through so much and still remained strong. After the ceremony, we celebrated with a small reception in the garden of the chapel. As I twirled around the dance floor with Ethan, I caught another glimpse of Olivia, standing by herself in the shadows, watching us from a distance. She raised her champagne glass slightly when our eyes met, offering me a half-hearted smile. Again, I pushed away the uneasy feeling, convincing myself that I was overthinking things. It was my wedding day, and I didn't want anything to spoil the joy I felt. Ethan was all I could have hoped for in a partner. Kind, thoughtful, and always putting me first. We had built a foundation of trust and love that I believed nothing could shake. After months of planning and dreaming, we were finally married, and I was ready to begin our life together as husband and wife. When we left for our honeymoon, everything was perfect. We spent 2 blissful weeks in Italy, exploring picturesque villages, indulging in delicious food, and simply enjoying each other's company. It felt like a fairy tale, and I allowed myself to believe that this happiness would last forever. But even during those perfect moments, a small part of me couldn't shake Olivia's strange behavior at the wedding. She hadn't shown any real excitement for us, and though Ethan assured me that she was simply adjusting to the idea of her little brother getting married, I wondered if there was more to it. I told myself I was being silly, that it was normal for siblings to have complex emotions about big life changes. When we returned home from our honeymoon, we moved into our cozy suburban house, a place where I imagined we would build our future together. The first few months of our marriage were blissful. Ethan was attentive and caring, and we spent our days planning for the future, talking about children, decorating the house, and building a life that felt like it was straight out of a storybook. However, as much as I tried to push it aside, Olivia's presence loomed larger with each passing week. She started visiting more frequently, and each time she did, the same tight-lipped smile and sharp gaze followed her. She never said anything overtly negative, but her energy, her demeanor, felt like a dark cloud hanging over our otherwise bright and happy marriage. Ethan assured me that Olivia would come around, that she was just having a hard time adjusting to him no longer being under her care. He often reminded me of how much Olivia had done for him, how important she had been in his life. I understood that, but something in the pit of my stomach told me that Olivia's feelings went deeper than just sibling protectiveness. Looking back, I realize now that the seeds of doubt were planted early, even on that otherwise perfect wedding day. I didn't know it then, but Olivia's presence was more than just a sisterly shadow. It was the beginning of a battle I didn't yet know I would have to fight. The weeks following our wedding felt like a dream come true. After the excitement of the ceremony and the reception, Ethan and I boarded a plane to Italy for our honeymoon, ready to spend 2 blissful weeks together. The Italian countryside was even more breathtaking than I had imagined, rolling hills, ancient towns perched on cliffs, and the endless blue sky stretching out above us. It felt like we were in our own little world, where nothing could touch us. Ethan and I spent our days wandering through vineyards, sipping wine in sun-drenched cafes, and losing ourselves in conversation as we planned our future together. We talked about everything: where we wanted to travel next, what our first child's name would be, how we would make our new house into a home. It was perfect. For those 2 weeks, it felt like we were the only 2 people on earth, completely wrapped up in each other and the excitement of our new life together. But there were moments, even during our honeymoon, when Olivia's shadow crept into my thoughts. I couldn't shake the memory of her cool, detached expression at the wedding. She had smiled, yes, but it never quite reached her eyes. And when I replayed the moments in my mind, I realized that Olivia had barely spoken to me throughout the entire day. It was as if she had been watching, waiting for something to go wrong. Ethan reassured me when I brought it up in passing. "She's just protective, Emma," he said, squeezing my hand as we sat together on the balcony of our hotel room, looking out over the Tuscan hills. "She practically raised me after Mom and Dad passed. This is a big change for her too, you know?" I nodded, wanting to believe him. After all, Olivia had been a constant in Ethan's life for so long, stepping into the role of both sister and caretaker after their parents died in a car accident when he was just 10 years old. She had sacrificed a lot for him, delaying her own dreams, to make sure he had everything he needed growing up. I couldn't fault her for that. I had admired her for it. But still, something about the way she had watched me during the wedding, the tightness in her smile, the way she kept her distance, it all made me feel uneasy. Ethan didn't seem to notice, though, and I decided not to push the issue. It was probably just in my head, I told myself. I didn't want to ruin our honeymoon with my paranoia. When we returned home from Italy, the real world greeted us with open arms. Our quaint suburban house awaited, a cozy 2-story that felt like the perfect place to start a family. It was everything I had ever dreamed of. We spent the first few weeks setting up the house, hanging pictures on the walls, organizing furniture, and dreaming about what our future held. Ethan was incredible during those first few months of marriage. He was loving and supportive, constantly checking in to make sure I was happy. We spent our weekends exploring the neighborhood, going on picnics, and staying up late watching movies. I was certain that we had the kind of marriage people envied. I had found my forever. But then Olivia started visiting. At first, it was just once a week. She would drop by unannounced, smiling that same tight-lipped smile and carrying a casserole or some homemade dish, claiming she just wanted to check in on her little brother. I didn't mind it at first. I knew how close they were, and I respected the bond they shared. But as the weeks went by, her visits became more frequent, sometimes twice, sometimes 3 times a week. And each time, her comments grew more intrusive. "Oh, Emma, you went with those curtains," she said one afternoon, her eyes narrowing as she looked around the living room. "I guess they're fine." Ethan always liked something more classic, though. "Don't you, Ethan?" Ethan chuckled and waved her off. "They're just curtains, Liv. Emma's got great taste." But I could feel the sting of her words. It wasn't just about the curtains. It was the way she made me feel, like I was doing something wrong by being here, by making decisions for the house that was supposed to be mine and Ethan's. Then it was the cooking. "Oh, Emma, you're making lasagna," she remarked another evening when she showed up just before dinner. "That's sweet, but Ethan always loved my version." I'll send you the recipe. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a subtle dig. I tried to smile through it, telling myself that she was just trying to be helpful. But with each visit, her words chipped away at my confidence, making me feel smaller and more inadequate. Ethan didn't see it. To him, Olivia's remarks were harmless, just her way of being involved. She's just looking out for me, he'd say whenever I tried to bring it up. She's always been like that. But I wasn't so sure. It felt like more than sibling protectiveness. It felt like Olivia didn't want me in Ethan's life, like she was determined to make me feel as though I didn't belong. And slowly, I started to wonder if maybe I didn't. The tension between Olivia and me was building, though Ethan remained oblivious. He laughed off her comments and continued to assure me that she would come around, that she was just adjusting to the change. But the more Olivia visited, the more I started to feel like an outsider in my own marriage. I loved Ethan deeply, but I could see that Olivia's presence was beginning to create a wedge between us. And I didn't know how to stop it. As time went on, Olivia's visits became more frequent and, with them, the growing sense that she wasn't just trying to stay connected to her brother, she was trying to assert control. At first, it was small things, as it had always been, her comments about the curtains, her critiques of my cooking, her subtle jabs about my job. But the more she came over, the more intrusive she became, until I felt like I was living in a house that was no longer mine. Ethan, of course, didn't see it that way. To him, Olivia was just being Olivia, his protective older sister who had always looked out for him. He had grown up idolizing her, relying on her after their parents passed away when they were young. I knew their bond was deep, and I had respected that from the start. But now, it felt like Olivia was taking advantage of that bond, using her role in Ethan's life to slowly push me out. One Saturday afternoon, after Olivia had stopped by unannounced yet again, she found me in the kitchen preparing lunch. Ethan had gone out to run errands, so it was just Olivia and me, an awkward pairing that I always dreaded. I was making sandwiches when she breezed in, her perfectly manicured fingers trailing over the countertops as she surveyed the kitchen. "I see you've reorganized the cabinets," she said, her tone light but with a sharpness underneath. "Interesting choice. Ethan always liked the mugs to be in this cabinet here." She tapped on the door above the sink. I clenched my jaw, resisting the urge to snap back. "I rearranged a few things to make it easier when I'm cooking," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "It just made more sense this way." Olivia gave me that tight-lipped smile I had come to dread. "Well, I guess as long as Ethan's okay with it." Her words stung, and I could feel my frustration boiling beneath the surface. Why did it always feel like everything I did in this house had to meet Olivia's approval? Why did she act like she was still the one in charge of Ethan's life, his preferences, and his needs? Before I could respond, she glided over to the table and took a seat, crossing her legs elegantly. "You know, Ethan and I used to have a system when we lived together," she said, her voice casual. "I handled most of the household decisions, because he's always been so busy with work. I'm just used to taking care of him, I suppose." There it was again, that reminder that she had been there long before I was. The way she said it, so effortlessly, made it clear that she believed she still held that role in Ethan's life, even now that he was married. It was as though she saw me as an intruder in her carefully constructed world. I felt a lump form in my throat, but I forced it down. "Things are different now," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Ethan and I make those decisions together." Olivia's smile widened, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course," she said, her voice sugary sweet. "I'm sure you do your best." It was a backhanded compliment, and I knew it. Olivia had perfected the art of making me feel small without ever saying anything overtly cruel. Every time she came over, it was like she was slowly chipping away at my confidence, reminding me that I would never measure up to the role she had played in Ethan's life. And the worst part was, Ethan didn't see it. He never seemed to notice the subtle digs, the condescending comments, or the way Olivia inserted herself into every aspect of our lives. When Ethan returned home later that afternoon, Olivia greeted him with a warm smile and an affectionate hug, as if nothing had happened. They sat in the living room, laughing and reminiscing about their childhood while I stayed in the kitchen, cleaning up the lunch I had barely touched. As I wiped down the counters, I could hear their voices drifting through the house. Olivia was telling a story about the time she and Ethan had taken a road trip when he was still in high school, how they had gotten lost and ended up spending the night in a tiny motel off the highway. Ethan laughed, the sound of it warm and familiar, and for a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. Was I being unreasonable? Was I reading too much into Olivia's behavior? But then, Olivia said something that made my heart sink. "You know, Ethan, it's hard to believe how much things have changed," she said, her voice soft with nostalgia. "Sometimes, I miss the days when it was just the two of us." Ethan chuckled. "Yeah, things were simpler back then." Simpler. The word echoed in my mind, sharp and painful. Simpler, when it was just Ethan and Olivia. Simpler, before I was in the picture. I couldn't stay in the kitchen any longer. I walked into the living room, forcing a smile as I sat down on the couch beside Ethan. "What are you two talking about?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Olivia glanced at me, her smile still in place. "Just reminiscing," she said lightly. "It's funny how things change, isn't it?" I nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle over me like a heavy blanket. Things had changed, but not in the way Olivia meant. It wasn't just that Ethan and I were married now, it was that Olivia couldn't seem to let go of the past, couldn't accept that Ethan's life had moved forward, that he was building a future with me. Later that night, after Olivia had finally left, I tried to talk to Ethan about it again. "Ethan, don't you think Olivia is, I don't know, a little too involved in our lives?" I asked cautiously as we lay in bed. He sighed, rolling over to face me. "Emma, she's just being Olivia," he said, his voice tired. "She's always been like this. She cares about us." "I know she cares," I replied, choosing my words carefully. "But it feels like she's trying to control everything. Like she doesn't think I'm good enough to be part of your life." Ethan frowned. "That's not true. She likes you, Emma. She's just adjusting. Give her time." I wanted to believe him, but the doubt was already there, gnawing at me. I could feel it creeping into the corners of my mind, planting seeds of insecurity and fear. What if Ethan never saw what I saw? What if Olivia always had this hold over him, always making me feel like I was second best? I lay awake long after Ethan had fallen asleep, staring up at the ceiling, my mind racing. I loved Ethan more than anything, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Olivia was slowly driving a wedge between us. And I didn't know how much longer I could keep pretending that everything was fine. The tension between Olivia and me had been building for months, slowly growing into a constant undercurrent of stress in my marriage. Each time she came over, each time she made a cutting remark, I felt more and more like an outsider in my own home. But as much as I tried to talk to Ethan about it, he always brushed it off. He didn't see what I saw, or perhaps he didn't want to see it. I loved Ethan deeply, but it was becoming harder and harder to ignore the fact that he always took Olivia's side. Whenever she criticized me or suggested that I wasn't doing things the way Ethan liked them, Ethan would laugh and reassure me that Olivia was just being her usual self, protective, but well-meaning. To him, it was harmless. To me, it was exhausting. Things reached a breaking point one afternoon when I was cleaning out the filing cabinet in Ethan's office. He had asked me to organize some old paperwork, and I figured it was as good a time as any to tidy up the clutter. As I sorted through old receipts, utility bills, and contracts, I stumbled upon a thick stack of bank statements, some dating back several years. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, but when I saw the amounts listed on the statements, my heart stopped. Large sums of money had been withdrawn from Ethan's account, much larger than I had ever seen before. At first, I thought it was a mistake, or maybe something I didn't understand. But as I kept flipping through the papers, the pattern became clear. There had been consistent withdrawals from Ethan's inheritance account, the money he had inherited after his parents passed away. The amounts were staggering, and they had been taken out over the course of several years. My hands began to shake as I looked closer at the details. The transactions all led to a single account, an account in Olivia's name. I stared at the papers, my mind racing. What was this? Why was Olivia taking money from Ethan's inheritance? Had he known about it? I couldn't believe that he would have willingly let her take such large amounts of money without telling me. Something wasn't right. I kept searching through the files, hoping to find something that would explain what I was seeing. Maybe it was all some kind of misunderstanding. Maybe there was a legitimate reason for Olivia to have access to the money. But the more I looked, the clearer it became. Olivia had been siphoning money from Ethan's inheritance for years, and Ethan didn't seem to know anything about it. I sat back in the chair, my mind whirling. I knew Olivia had always been controlling, always trying to insert herself into our lives, but this? This was outright betrayal. She wasn't just meddling in our relationship anymore, she was stealing from her own brother. I spent the rest of the afternoon pacing the house, trying to figure out what to do. I needed to tell Ethan, but how could I approach him with this? He was already so defensive when it came to Olivia. He never wanted to hear a bad word about her, and every time I tried to bring up my concerns, he shut me down. How would he react when I told him that his beloved sister had been stealing from him? By the time Ethan got home that evening, my anxiety was through the roof. I had spent hours rehearsing what I would say, but now that he was here, sitting across from me at the dinner table, I wasn't sure how to start. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached for the stack of bank statements I had laid out on the table. "Ethan, we need to talk," I said, my voice shaking slightly. He looked up from his plate, a concerned expression crossing his face. "What's wrong?" I took a deep breath and pushed the papers toward him. "I found these when I was organizing the office today. They're your old bank statements from the inheritance account." Ethan frowned as he picked up the papers, flipping through them casually at first. But as he scanned the transactions, his expression changed. His brow furrowed, and his eyes narrowed as he realized what he was looking at. What is this?" he muttered, confusion lacing his voice. "Olivia has been taking money from your account," I said, my voice firmer now. "Large amounts of money. It's all right there, she's been doing it for years. I don't know why, but it's clear she's been siphoning money from your inheritance." Ethan's face turned pale, and for a moment, I thought he was going to be as shocked as I was. I expected him to feel the same sense of betrayal, the same anger and hurt that I had felt when I first discovered the withdrawals. But instead, his expression hardened, and he tossed the papers back onto the table. "How dare you accuse Olivia of stealing from me?" he snapped, his voice low and dangerous. I blinked, stunned by his reaction. "Ethan, the proof is right there," I said, gesturing to the bank statements. "I'm not accusing her without reason. She's been taking thousands of dollars from your account. How can you not see that?" But Ethan wasn't listening. His face flushed with anger, and he stood up from the table, pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. "You're always trying to find something wrong with Olivia," he spat. "She's done nothing but help me my entire life, and now you're accusing her of stealing? Do you even hear yourself? I'm not making this up." I shot back, feeling the panic rising in my chest. "Look at the statements, Ethan. She's been draining your inheritance, and you didn't even notice." "How do you know?" he demanded, his voice shaking with anger. "How do you know what Olivia and I have or haven't talked about? You're always prying into things that don't concern you, Emma. This is none of your business." I stared at him, my heart pounding in my ears. None of my business? This is your inheritance, Ethan, our future. Of course it's my business. But he wasn't hearing me. His loyalty to Olivia was blinding him, making him see me as the enemy instead of his sister. No matter how much evidence I showed him, no matter how clear the betrayal was, he would never believe that Olivia could do something like this. To him, Olivia was perfect, untouchable. And in his eyes, I was the one trying to tear them apart. I can't believe you're doing this, Ethan muttered, running a hand through his hair in frustration. I thought you trusted me, Emma. I do trust you, I said, my voice trembling. But I don't trust her. She's been manipulating you for years, and now she's stealing from you. How can you defend her after everything she's done? Ethan shook his head, his eyes dark with anger. You're the one with the problem, not her, he said, his voice cold. You've always had an issue with Olivia, and now you're trying to drag me into it. Well, I'm not going to let you. Tears welled up in my eyes as I realized the truth. No matter what I said, no matter how much proof I had, Ethan would never believe me. He would always choose Olivia over me. I felt like my world was crumbling around me, the foundation of my marriage shattered by his refusal to see the truth. Ethan, please, I whispered, my voice breaking. I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to protect you. But it was too late. Ethan had already made up his mind. He stood there, staring at me with a mixture of anger and disappointment, as if I had betrayed him by uncovering the truth. Just drop it, Emma, he said, his voice cold and final. This conversation is over. And with that, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving me alone at the table, the stack of bank statements still sitting in front of me like a pile of broken promises. In that moment, I realized that my marriage was in more trouble than I had ever imagined. I wasn't just fighting Olivia anymore, I was fighting the bond she had with Ethan, a bond that seemed unbreakable. And I didn't know if I had the strength to keep fighting. After the discovery of the bank statements and Ethan's refusal to see Olivia for who she really was, things between us were never the same. It was as if a wall had gone up between us, and no matter what I did, I couldn't break through. Ethan, once so loving and attentive, became distant, barely speaking to me unless it was to defend Olivia. His unwavering loyalty to her was infuriating, but more than that, it broke my heart. I felt as if I was losing the man I loved, piece by piece. Olivia, of course, knew exactly what she was doing. Each time she came over, she would smile sweetly at Ethan, make casual conversation, and pretend as though nothing had changed. But when she looked at me, her eyes were cold, calculating. She knew that I had confronted Ethan about the money, and she was using it to her advantage. The more Ethan pulled away from me, the closer he seemed to get to Olivia. It was as if she was winning some twisted game that only she knew the rules to. One evening, a few weeks after the confrontation about the bank statements, Olivia came over for dinner. She showed up unannounced, as usual, with a bottle of wine in hand and that ever-present smile on her face. I had stopped trying to hide my frustration with her, but Ethan, as always, greeted her warmly, oblivious to the tension between us. Emma, darling, you're looking tired, Olivia said as she walked into the kitchen, her voice dripping with faux concern. Is everything okay? You know, it can be so overwhelming trying to manage everything. Maybe you should take a break. I clenched my teeth, trying to hold back the anger bubbling inside me. I'm fine, Olivia, I said, my voice tight. Thanks for your concern. Ethan entered the room, oblivious as always. Hey, Liv, glad you could join us. We're just about to sit down for dinner. Olivia gave him a wide smile, placing the wine bottle on the counter. I wouldn't miss it for the world, she said, shooting me a sidelong glance. Throughout dinner, Olivia monopolized the conversation, recounting stories of their childhood, subtly reminding Ethan of the bond they shared, the sacrifices she had made for him. Every story was designed to paint her as the ultimate martyr, the perfect sister who had always been there for him, while I, by contrast, was the outsider trying to tear them apart. "Do you remember that trip to the lake, Ethan?" Olivia asked, her voice wistful. "We spent the entire summer there after Mom and Dad passed. It was just you and me, figuring things out together. You were so lost, but we made it through, didn't we?" Ethan smiled, nodding as he leaned back in his chair. "Yeah, I remember. You really took care of me, Liv. I don't know what I would have done without you." The word stung. It was as if Olivia was deliberately excluding me from their bond, reminding me, and Ethan, that I would never understand the depth of their relationship. I tried to stay calm, but the longer dinner went on, the more unbearable it became. I felt invisible, as though I was intruding in a conversation I had no place in. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Why do you keep doing this, Olivia?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. The room fell silent. Ethan looked at me, surprised by my outburst, while Olivia's smile faltered for just a moment before she regained her composure. "Doing what, Emma?" she asked innocently, tilting her head as if she had no idea what I was talking about. "Undermining me," I said, my voice shaking with emotion. "Every time you come over, you make me feel like I don't belong here. Like I'm not good enough for Ethan. You've been doing it for months, and I'm done pretending I don't notice." Ethan's eyes widened, and he opened his mouth to say something, but Olivia cut him off. "Oh, Emma," she said with a sigh, shaking her head. "You're being paranoid. I've done nothing but try to help you and Ethan. If you feel threatened by me, that's not my fault." I could feel the rage building inside me. "This isn't paranoia, Olivia. You've been manipulating Ethan, using your history with him, to push me out of the way. And you know it." Ethan stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger. "Emma, stop," he said, his voice firm. "This is ridiculous. Olivia's done nothing wrong." "How can you say that?" I demanded, my voice rising. "She's been controlling you, Ethan. She's been taking your money, manipulating you, and now she's trying to destroy our marriage. How can you not see that?" "Because it's not true," Ethan shouted, slamming his fist down on the table. "You're the one causing all of this. You've never liked Olivia, and now you're trying to turn me against her. I won't let you do that." The room was filled with a tense silence as Ethan's words hung in the air. Tears welled up in my eyes, and I stood there, feeling utterly defeated. I had tried everything to make him see the truth, but he refused. He had chosen Olivia over me, and there was nothing I could do to change that. I turned to Olivia, who was watching the scene unfold with a look of smug satisfaction on her face. She had won, and she knew it. "You can have him," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "If that's what you want, you can have him." Before anyone could say anything, I stormed out of the dining room, my heart pounding in my chest. I made my way to the bedroom, where I collapsed onto the bed, tears streaming down my face. I felt broken, like my entire world was falling apart. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps approaching the door. Ethan stood in the doorway, his face filled with regret. "Emma," he said softly, "we need to talk." I sat up, wiping the tears from my eyes. "What's there to talk about, Ethan? You've already made your choice." He walked into the room, sitting down on the edge of the bed. "I haven't chosen anyone," he said quietly. I don't know how to fix this." I looked at him, my heart aching. "The only way to fix this is for you to open your eyes and see what's really happening," I said. "Olivia is manipulating you, Ethan. She's always been manipulative, and you're letting her control you." Ethan shook his head, his expression pained. "I don't know if I can believe that." And that was it. I realized then that no matter what I said, no matter how much proof I had, Ethan would never truly see Olivia for what she was. He would always be under her spell, always loyal to her in a way that he could never be with me. I stood up, grabbing my jacket from the chair. "I can't do this anymore, Ethan," I said, my voice trembling. "I love you, but I can't keep fighting for a place in your life when your sister will always come first." He looked at me, his eyes filled with sadness. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying it's over," I whispered, choking back a sob. "I can't live like this anymore." With that, I walked out of the room, leaving Ethan behind. As I left the house, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief wash over me. It was over. My marriage, my life with Ethan, it was all over. But as I walked down the street, the cool night air filling my lungs, I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't going to let Olivia win. Not this time. When I woke up in the hospital, my head was throbbing. The fluorescent lights above me felt too bright, and the sterile smell of antiseptic made my stomach turn. It took a few moments for me to piece together where I was and why I was there. The memory of Olivia smashing the crystal vase over my head flooded back in an instant, and with it, the crushing realization that everything I had feared had finally come to pass. I tried to sit up, but the pain in my head was too much. A soft groan escaped my lips, and almost immediately, I felt a gentle hand on my arm. "Emma, don't move too quickly," came Laura's familiar voice. I turned my head slightly to see her sitting beside my hospital bed, her face etched with worry. "You've been through a lot." I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to push past the fog in my mind. "What happened?" I croaked, my throat dry and scratchy. Laura gave my hand a comforting squeeze. "You're in the hospital," she explained gently. "Olivia attacked you. She hit you with a vase, and you were unconscious when Ethan called for help. You've been here for a day." As soon as I heard Olivia's name, my heart sank. The woman who had spent months undermining me, who had taken so much from me, had finally snapped. And Ethan? What had Ethan done? Was he still defending her? What about Olivia? I asked, my voice trembling. Did the police arrest her? Laura's expression darkened. She hesitated, her hand still gripping mine tightly. They took her in for questioning, but... Emma, Ethan refused to press charges. The weight of her words hit me like a ton of bricks. I stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. Ethan had refused to press charges. After everything Olivia had done, stealing from him, manipulating him, and now physically attacking me, he still couldn't bring himself to hold her accountable. He said it was a misunderstanding, Laura continued, her voice laced with frustration. He told the police that you and Olivia were just arguing and that it got out of hand. He's still defending her, Emma. Tears welled up in my eyes, and I bit my lip to keep them from falling. How could this be happening? How could Ethan, the man I had loved with all my heart, still stand by Olivia after everything she had done? I can't believe this, I whispered, my voice barely audible. He's choosing her again. Laura shook her head, her own frustration evident. I don't understand it either, Emma. But you can't keep putting yourself through this. Olivia is dangerous, and Ethan is so far under her control that he can't see what's right in front of him. I nodded weakly, the tears slipping down my cheeks. Deep down, I had known for a long time that Ethan would never truly see Olivia for what she was. But it didn't make the reality of it any less painful. I had fought so hard to save my marriage, to make Ethan understand the damage Olivia was causing, but it had all been for nothing. As I lay there, staring up at the ceiling, a new feeling began to settle over me. It wasn't anger, though I had every right to feel furious with Ethan for betraying me yet again. It wasn't even sadness, though the weight of the situation threatened to crush me. No, what I felt was something else entirely, resolve. For months, I had allowed Olivia to manipulate and control my life. I had let her push me to the breaking point, all while hoping that Ethan would one day open his eyes and stand up for me. But that wasn't going to happen. Ethan had made his choice, and he had chosen his sister. There was no salvaging our marriage. There was no future for us as long as Olivia remained in the picture. But I wasn't going to let Olivia win. "I'm done," I said, my voice stronger than it had been in weeks. Laura looked at me, her eyes filled with concern. "What do you mean?" "I'm done with Ethan. I'm done with Olivia. I can't keep living like this, Laura," I said, sitting up slowly, despite the pain in my head. "I've spent months trying to fight for a marriage that's already over. Ethan has made his choice, and it's not me. I have to accept that." Laura's expression softened, and she nodded slowly. "Emma, you've been through hell. You don't owe them anything." "I know," I replied, my resolve hardening with each passing second. "But I can't let Olivia keep getting away with this. She's manipulated Ethan for years, stolen from him, and now she's physically hurt me. She needs to face the consequences." "We'll go to the police again," Laura said, her voice filled with determination. "Even if Ethan won't press charges, we'll make sure Olivia is held accountable. We'll find a way." I nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. I wasn't alone in this. Laura had been by my side through it all, and with her support, I knew I could finally put an end to Olivia's reign of terror. As I sat there in the hospital bed, a strange sense of peace settled over me. For the first time in months, I felt like I was in control of my own life again. I had spent too long trying to fix something that was beyond repair, clinging to a marriage that had been poisoned by Olivia's manipulation. It was time to let go. The next morning, after I was discharged from the hospital, Laura and I went straight to the police station. We filed a formal complaint against Olivia, detailing the months of emotional abuse, the financial betrayal, and the physical assault. The police took our statements seriously, and they promised to investigate further. As we left the station, I felt lighter than I had in months. I knew it wouldn't be easy, and I knew that Ethan might never fully understand the truth. But that was no longer my concern. I couldn't save him from Olivia, but I could save myself. As I walked out into the cool morning air, I knew one thing for sure: Olivia's hold on me was over, and I was finally free. After everything that had happened, Olivia's physical attack, Ethan's refusal to press charges, and my decision to move forward without him, I knew I had to take matters into my own hands. Olivia had caused more damage than I ever thought possible, and I couldn't just walk away without holding her accountable. There had to be more to her story, more than just the manipulation and theft that I had already uncovered. My best friend, Laura, had been my rock throughout the entire ordeal. She was the one who pushed me to keep fighting, even when I felt like giving up. She understood the depths of Olivia's manipulation better than anyone, and together, we decided that the only way to truly stop Olivia was to dig deeper into her past. We needed evidence, something concrete that would not only expose her, but also force Ethan to finally see the truth. "I've always had a feeling about her," Laura said one afternoon as we sat in my living room, surrounded by papers and documents. "There's something more going on, something dark. We just have to find it." I nodded in agreement, the determination in my chest burning stronger with each passing day. She's been getting away with this for too long. If we can find proof of something bigger, something Ethan can't ignore, then maybe we can finally bring her down. Over the next few days, Laura and I scoured every piece of information we could find about Olivia. We searched through old financial records, public documents, and anything else that could give us a glimpse into her life before Ethan and me. What we found was shocking. One evening, as I was combing through old newspaper articles, I stumbled across something that made my blood run cold. "Laura," I called, my voice trembling. She rushed over to my side, looking down at the screen of my laptop. "What is it?" she asked, her eyes scanning the article in front of us. It was an obituary, dated nearly a decade ago. Olivia had been married once before, to a man named Richard Connors. But what caught my attention wasn't just the fact that she had been married, it was the circumstances surrounding her husband's death. According to the article, Richard had died in a car accident under mysterious circumstances. There had been some speculation about foul play at the time, but the investigation had been inconclusive. Olivia had inherited his entire estate, a small fortune that had quietly disappeared from the public eye. "Do you think?" Laura began, but I didn't need her to finish the sentence. I already knew where her mind was going. "Olivia killed him," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. It sounded absurd, even saying it out loud, but the pieces were starting to fall into place. The manipulation, the control, the money. It was all part of a larger pattern. Olivia had likely orchestrated her husband's death to inherit his fortune, and now she was doing the same thing to Ethan, slowly but surely. Laura leaned in closer, her face pale. "Emma, if this is true..." "We need more proof," I said quickly, cutting her off. "This isn't enough. It's just an obituary. We need evidence that she was involved in his death, something that ties her to what happened." With renewed determination, we dove deeper into our search. It took hours of digging through court records, archived articles, and even social media posts, but eventually, we hit pay dirt. Buried deep in the public records, we found something that tied it all together, a police report from just after Richard Connors' death. It detailed the initial investigation, which included interviews with several of Richard's friends and colleagues. One of the key witnesses had mentioned that Richard had been growing increasingly paranoid in the weeks leading up to his death. He had confided in a close friend that Olivia had been pressuring him to change his will, ensuring that everything would go to her if anything happened to him. More damning still, we uncovered bank records that showed large sums of money being transferred from Richard's accounts to Olivia's just before his death, money that she claimed was for investment purposes, though there was no evidence to support that. The timing of the transfers, coupled with Richard's sudden death, painted a clear picture of what had happened. "This is it," I said, my heart racing. "This is the proof we needed." Laura nodded, her expression grim. "We have enough now. Enough to go to the police and reopen the investigation into Richard's death, and enough to finally show Ethan who his sister really is." With the evidence in hand, we went straight to the police station. I had been there before, filing the report about Olivia's attack, but this time I felt different. This time I had the upper hand. We met with the detective handling Olivia's case, laying out everything we had found. The detective listened carefully, his brow furrowed as we explained the connections between Olivia's manipulation of Ethan and the suspicious circumstances surrounding her previous husband's death. When we showed him the bank records and the police report, he leaned back in his chair, shaking his head in disbelief. "This is serious," he said, his voice grave. "If what you're saying is true, we may be dealing with a pattern of behavior. I'll have to look into this further, but based on what you brought me today, I think we can reopen the investigation into Richard Connors' death." A wave of relief washed over me, but it was mixed with something else, fear. I knew that uncovering Olivia's dark past was only the beginning. There was no telling how she would react once she realized that the walls were closing in on her. But I also knew that I couldn't back down now. Olivia had hurt too many people, and she needed to be stopped. As we left the police station, Laura turned to me, her eyes filled with determination. "You did the right thing, Emma. No matter what happens next, you've finally taken control." I nodded, feeling a new sense of resolve settling over me. For the first time in months, I felt like I was no longer the victim in Olivia's twisted game. I was fighting back, and I wouldn't stop until she was held accountable for everything she had done. With the evidence we had gathered about Olivia's dark past and the suspicious circumstances surrounding her previous husband's death, I knew we were finally ready to take action. The pieces of the puzzle had fallen into place, and now it was time to make sure Olivia faced the consequences of her actions. The manipulation, the lies, the control, everything she had done was about to catch up with her. Laura and I made our way back to the police station, the stack of documents and evidence clutched tightly in my hands. My heart pounded as we walked through the front doors, the weight of what we were about to do settling heavily on my shoulders. This wasn't just about me anymore. It wasn't just about the way Olivia had tried to ruin my life and my marriage. This was about justice, about stopping a woman who had hurt so many people for her own gain. As we approached the front desk, the same detective who had spoken to us before recognized us immediately. He nodded gravely as he stood up, gesturing for us to follow him into his office. The moment we sat down, I spread out the documents on his desk, the police reports, the bank statements, the witness testimonies from Richard Connor's death. Every shred of evidence we had uncovered over the past few days was laid bare. The detective leaned forward, his brow furrowed in concentration as he sifted through the papers. His silence was heavy, but I could see the pieces falling into place in his mind. He picked up the police report from Richard's death, his eyes scanning the words carefully. "Are you saying Olivia was involved in this?" he asked, looking up at me with a hard gaze. I nodded, my throat tightening. Yes. She pressured him to change his will, and after he died, she inherited everything. It's the same pattern with Ethan, using manipulation, controlling his finances, and pushing anyone who gets in her way. Laura chimed in, her voice steady and determined. She's dangerous. We have every reason to believe she orchestrated Richard's death, and if she isn't stopped, there's no telling what she'll do next. The detective sat back in his chair, his expression grim. This is serious. If this is true, we're not just dealing with fraud or manipulation. We're looking at potential murder. A chill ran down my spine as the word murder hung in the air. I had suspected it, of course, but hearing it spoken out loud made everything feel so much more real. Olivia wasn't just a manipulative woman who had torn apart my marriage, she was a predator who had possibly killed before, and if she wasn't stopped, she might do it again. The detective leaned forward, steepling his fingers as he studied me. We'll need to reopen the investigation into Richard Connor's death. Based on the evidence you've provided, I believe we have enough to proceed with charges of fraud and assault, but the murder investigation will take time. We'll need to gather more evidence and interview witnesses again. I nodded, feeling a sense of relief, but also dread. The wheels of justice were finally turning, but I knew this was far from over. Olivia wasn't going to go down without a fight, and the thought of facing her again, of seeing her reaction when she realized what we had uncovered, filled me with a mix of fear and anticipation. We'll make sure she's held accountable, the detective assured me. But I need you to understand that these things take time. It won't be immediate. I understand, I said, my voice steady. I just want her stopped. I want her to face the consequences for everything she's done. The detective nodded, gathering the documents into a neat stack on his desk. I'll start the process right away. We'll put out a warrant for her arrest on the fraud and assault charges while we continue investigating Richard's death. As we left the police station, a strange sense of calm settled over me. For the first time in months, I felt like I was in control again. I had been living in fear of Olivia for so long, constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering when she would strike next. But now, the tables had turned. She was the one being hunted, and justice was finally catching up with her. A few days later, I received the call from the detective. Olivia had been arrested. It was a surreal moment, hearing those words. The woman who had tried to destroy me, who had manipulated Ethan and stolen from him, who had likely killed her previous husband, was finally behind bars. Laura and I met with the detective again shortly after her arrest to discuss the next steps. Olivia was being charged with fraud and assault based on the evidence we had provided. The police had also reopened the investigation into Richard Connor's death, and new witnesses were coming forward, providing testimony that supported our claims about Olivia's involvement. As the detective explained the legal process, my mind drifted to Ethan. I hadn't spoken to him since Olivia's arrest. I didn't know how he was handling it, or if he even believed that his sister was guilty. Part of me wanted to reach out to him, to try one last time to make him understand the truth. But the larger part of me knew it was pointless. Ethan had made his choice long ago, and no amount of evidence was going to change that. The media quickly picked up on the story. Olivia's arrest made headlines, and people were shocked to learn about the dark secrets she had been hiding. They called her a black widow, a woman who preyed on the people closest to her for financial gain. The coverage was intense, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of validation as the world finally saw Olivia for who she really was. Still, even with Olivia behind bars, I couldn't shake the feeling of loss. My marriage was over, and the man I had once loved so deeply was now a stranger to me. But as I looked ahead, I knew that I had made the right choice. I had fought for myself, for my freedom, and for justice, and in the end, that was all that mattered. Olivia would face the consequences of her actions. She would be held accountable for the damage she had caused. And while it didn't erase the pain of everything I had been through, it gave me the strength to move forward. As I walked out of the police station for the last time, I felt a sense of closure. This chapter of my life was ending, and a new one was beginning. I was free from Olivia's manipulation, free from the toxicity that had poisoned my marriage, and free to rebuild my life on my own terms. After Olivia's arrest, I thought that perhaps Ethan would finally see the truth. I had hoped that once the evidence of her manipulation and the fraud was laid bare, he would realize the damage his sister had done to our marriage, to his life, and to me. But as the days passed and I heard nothing from him, the painful reality began to settle in. Ethan wasn't going to come back. He wasn't going to admit that he had been wrong about Olivia. It was a bittersweet realization. Part of me had still clung to the idea that, after everything, Ethan and I could somehow reconcile. I had loved him so deeply for so long, and despite everything that had happened, a small part of me had wanted to believe that we could salvage what was left of our relationship. But the silence from him told me all I needed to know. Ethan wasn't coming back, and our marriage was truly over. Filing for divorce was one of the hardest things I had ever done. It felt like the final nail in the coffin of everything we had built together, the dreams, the love, the future we had once talked about so excitedly. But as I sat in my lawyer's office, signing the papers, I knew it was the only way forward. I couldn't keep holding on to something that no longer existed. Ethan had chosen Olivia time and time again, and I couldn't live in the shadow of his sister any longer. The divorce process moved quickly. Ethan didn't contest it. In fact, he didn't seem to care about any of the details. He offered me the house, the money, everything. It was as though he was trying to wash his hands of the entire situation, as if giving me the material things would somehow make up for the emotional devastation that had been left in the wake of Olivia's manipulation. But I didn't care about the house or the money. None of it mattered anymore. What I wanted, what I needed, was to rebuild my life without the toxic cloud of Olivia hanging over me. I sold the house not long after the divorce was finalized. I couldn't bear to stay in the place where so much pain had unfolded, where every room reminded me of the love that had withered away, poisoned by lies and deceit. The money I got from the sale was enough to start over. I found a small apartment in a quiet part of town, far away from the memories of my old life. It wasn't much, but it was mine. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. I was free from the manipulation, the constant stress of trying to prove myself to Ethan, and the suffocating presence of Olivia. Laura, always by my side, helped me move into my new place. As we unpacked boxes and set up furniture, she offered her usual words of wisdom and encouragement. "This is a fresh start, Emma," she said, handing me a coffee mug as we sat on the floor surrounded by boxes. "You've been through hell, but you came out the other side stronger. You don't need Ethan, and you definitely don't need Olivia. This is your time now." I nodded, grateful for her support, but still feeling the weight of everything that had happened. Starting over wasn't easy, especially when the life I had thought I was building with Ethan had crumbled so spectacularly. But Laura was right, I had survived. I had fought back, and now, I had the chance to rebuild, to create a life that was truly my own. As the days turned into weeks, I began to focus on my own healing. I threw myself into my work, finding solace in the routine of my job and the support of my colleagues. I started therapy, determined to work through the trauma of everything Olivia had put me through and to rediscover who I was outside of my relationship with Ethan. Slowly but surely, I began to find myself again. Olivia's trial took place several months after her arrest. She was charged with fraud and assault, and the investigation into her first husband's death continued. The media had dubbed her a Black Widow, and the story of her manipulation and deceit captivated the public. Despite her protests of innocence, the evidence against her was overwhelming. Witnesses testified about her controlling behavior, and the financial records we had uncovered showed a clear pattern of theft and manipulation. In the end, Olivia was sentenced to 20 years in prison. I didn't feel triumphant when I heard the verdict. There was no joy in knowing that someone I had once considered family was going to spend the next 2 decades behind bars. But I did feel a sense of closure. Olivia had finally been held accountable for her actions, and she would no longer have the power to hurt anyone else. Ethan, on the other hand, had disappeared from my life entirely. After the divorce was finalized, he moved out of the city, and I hadn't heard from him since. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned that he had checked into a rehabilitation program for emotional trauma. I didn't harbor any ill will toward him. In fact, I pitied him. Ethan had been just as much a victim of Olivia's manipulation as I had been, and though his weakness had led to the downfall of our marriage, I hoped that one day he would find peace. But I knew that my future didn't include him. I had spent so long trying to hold on to a relationship that had been doomed from the start, and now it was time to focus on myself. With Olivia behind bars and Ethan out of my life, I felt like I had finally regained control of my destiny. I had learned so much about myself through the pain and betrayal, and I was determined to never let anyone take that power from me again. I was stronger now, stronger than I had ever been before. As I settled into my new life, I found a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in years. I didn't know exactly what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of it. I was ready to face whatever came next, on my own terms. And that, I realized, was the greatest victory of all. After everything that had unfolded, Olivia's arrest, the divorce, and the whirlwind of emotions that came with losing the life I had once known, I finally found myself standing at the edge of a new beginning. The past months had been the most challenging of my life, but as I looked back, I realized something important: I had survived. There had been moments, especially during the early days, when I thought the weight of it all might crush me. Losing Ethan, the man I had once loved with all my heart, had felt like losing a part of myself. Our marriage, which I had fought so hard to protect, had disintegrated under the pressure of Olivia's manipulation. There were times when I wondered if I would ever truly be free of the pain she had caused, if the scars she left would ever fade. But now, sitting in my small, cozy apartment, a space that was entirely my own, I felt a sense of peace that had been absent from my life for so long. The silence in the room wasn't oppressive, it was comforting. It wasn't the silence of loneliness or isolation, it was the quiet that came with finally letting go. Olivia was no longer a part of my life. She had been sentenced to 20 years in prison, and though I hadn't sought revenge, knowing that she was being held accountable for her actions gave me a sense of closure. The media had turned her into a spectacle, calling her a black widow and exposing her for the manipulative predator she was. The world had seen her for who she truly was, and there was no hiding anymore. But I didn't revel in her downfall. Instead, I felt relief that her grip on my life was finally gone. Ethan, too, was a distant memory now. After the divorce, he had moved out of the city, and we hadn't spoken since. I knew from mutual acquaintances that he had entered a rehabilitation program to deal with the emotional trauma of everything that had happened. A part of me still pitied him. He had been as much a victim of Olivia's manipulation as I had been, but in the end, he had made his choice. He had chosen to stand by his sister, and that decision had cost him everything. I didn't harbor resentment toward Ethan anymore. I had made peace with the fact that our love wasn't enough to overcome the toxic influence of his sister. For so long, I had blamed myself, wondering what I could have done differently, how I could have saved our marriage. But now I understood that some things were simply beyond my control. Ethan had his own demons to face, and his journey wasn't mine to carry. As the days passed, I focused on rebuilding my life. Laura remained my constant support, helping me settle into my new home and reminding me of the strength I had shown throughout it all. I started therapy, working through the pain and confusion that had clouded my mind for so long. I rediscovered parts of myself that I had forgotten in the chaos of my marriage, the parts of me that were strong, resilient, and capable of thriving on my own. I also threw myself into my work, finding a renewed sense of purpose in helping others. It was through my experiences with Olivia's manipulation and emotional abuse that I found the strength to advocate for victims of similar situations. I began volunteering at a local shelter, speaking with women who had been through their own versions of manipulation and betrayal. Sharing my story with them became a form of healing for me as well. It was empowering to know that I could use my pain to help others find their way out of the darkness. The life I had once imagined with Ethan, the house, the children, the future we had talked about in those early days of our marriage, was gone. But in its place, I had found something far more valuable: my freedom. My peace. My strength. Sitting in my apartment, bathed in the soft glow of the afternoon light filtering through the curtains, I finally felt at home. This was my space, my life, and I was in control of it. I didn't need anyone to validate my worth or to prove that I was enough. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was truly at peace. And that, I realized, was the greatest victory I could have ever asked for.